Under the orange glow of sodium lamps in the cold wind off Lake Michigan, the first cordon snapped shut at 4:11 a.m. on Chicago's southwest side. Floodlights bloomed along an industrial rail spur near Brighton Park. Drones hummed above alleyways. Unmarked vans rolled in 2x2. Local police radios went strangely quiet, switched to encrypted channels, and a new voice took over the net, clipped military reading grid squares and ingress times. Witnesses later swore they saw soldiers in tan plate carriers, not blue uniforms. What mattered at street level was simpler. Doors came off hinges, and everyone inside, papers or no papers, was ordered out with hands up. This is the story of Operation Northern Shield, August 2025, the night the United States military deployed on American soil for domestic law enforcement, and the 48 hours that followed when Chicago became a battlefield and the line between security and occupation disappeared entirely. If you're here because you refuse to look away from hard truths, hit that subscribe button on Navy Warfare. We bring you the tactical breakdowns and operational analysis others won't touch. And drop a comment right now. Do you believe the military should ever be used for domestic law enforcement? The operation unfolded in 3 concentric rings, designed months in advance by a joint task force operating under Defense Support to Civil Authorities Protocols, DSCA for short. Inner ring. Fast entries on targeted addresses flagged by months of phone geofence data and license plate hits on night shift corridors, meatpacking plants, warehouses, river docks. Intelligence analysts had built a database of over 4,000 suspected addresses using cell tower pings, traffic cameras, and utility records cross-referenced with federal watch lists. Middle ring, mobile checkpoints seated onto feeder streets, Pulaski, Kedzie, Archer Avenue, where motorists were waved into lanes by men with infrared strobes taped to their sleeves. At each checkpoint, portable biometric scanners read fingerprints in under 3 seconds. Names were checked against databases updated in real time via satellite uplink. Outer ring, highway interdiction teams at the Stevenson Expressway and the Dan Ryan, box truck silhouettes tucked under ramps like patient predators. By sunrise, the city's arteries were constricted, and it wasn't Chicago PD running traffic. At 04:26, a Raven RQ-11 UAV drifted over McKinley Park, its thermal camera picking up a cluster of heat signatures trailing a box truck believed to be moving people from a stash house. 2 blocks away, a team in multicam uniforms stacked on a door, while a battering ram coughed once, then twice. A neighbor recorded the flash with trembling hands and whispered into her phone, "Those aren't cops." The video hit 12 million views by nightfall. "Advance to Phase 2, the calm voice said on the encrypted net. Phase 2 meant grocery store parking lots opening early for mobile document checks. It meant city buses halted mid-route and passengers asked to exit, men separated from women, phones placed in Mylar signal blocking bags so no pings escaped. On 35th Street, a father walking his daughter to a pre-dawn shift at a bakery was told to step aside. He had a state ID. He had a utility bill with his name on it. They took him anyway. The girl's scream braided into sirens and rotor thrum, then vanished in the morning wind off the lake. By 05:02, the pattern was undeniable. Unmarked Stryker-style infantry carriers, matte gray, low profile, engine fans whining, idled behind warehouses near the Chicago River. These weren't police vehicles. They were M126 Strykers, 8-wheeled armored personnel carriers designed for combat zones in Iraq and Afghanistan. Each carried a 9-man squad and mounted a .50 caliber M2 Browning machine gun. A mobile command node parked under a rail bridge, its communications mast extending with a soft hydraulic sigh, satellite dishes angling toward the sky like listening animals. Inside, operators monitored live feeds from drones, street cameras, and body-worn units. On a folding table sat pre-printed lists with color codes: red for detain, yellow for verify, green for release. But the colors bled in the rain, and categories shifted with the impatience of men who hadn't slept. A high school janitor on the green list was cuffed when his last name matched a red list alias by 1 letter. A nurse with a valid work visa was separated from her 8-year-old after a field scanner glitched and marked her document inconclusive. The scanner was rebooted. She wasn't released. Above, MH-60 Blackhawks from the 101st Airborne Division cut slow circles over the skyline. Officially, they were there for observation and coordination. But the door gunners were armed, and their rules of engagement were unclear even to them. At 05:19, a breach team turned off Cicero Avenue and cut into a dead-end street where a converted bungalow, 2 flags in the window, one American, one from a country far to the south, was believed to shelter 5 priority targets. The breach team used a frame charge designed to fold a door inward like a kicked card. Inside, they found a grandfather, 2 toddlers, and a woman already dressed for work. Body cams captured the moment someone realized the intel packet was 3 months old. The targets had moved. The cuffs stayed on anyway. Subscribe to Navy Warfare for operational breakdowns you won't find anywhere else. And tell us in the comments, is this security or is this something else entirely? At 05:41, the first protest lines formed, neighbors in coats over pajamas, phones held up like lanterns. A man in a Bears jacket shouted one word that echoed through the crowd. Posse Comitatus. His voice cracked on the last syllables. The Posse Comitatus Act of 1878 prohibits the use of federal military forces to enforce domestic policies within the United States. It was designed to prevent the Army from acting as a police force on American soil. But there are exceptions. The soldiers, if that's what they were, didn't look at the protesters. They were reading an operations card that said, in neutral font, Defense Support to Civil Authorities, DSCA, Observe, Assist, Advise. But the men at the curb did more than advise. They placed hands on shoulders. They steered people into lines. They nodded for others to tighten zip-tie cuffs. A Chicago Police Department sergeant stared at the laminated card, then stared at his boots. Later, he would tell investigators, I didn't know who was in charge anymore. At 06:03, the radio net reported unexpected collateral detentions. That's how they described a third-shift forklift driver, scooped up because he'd shared a borrowed phone with a cousin whose number was on a federal watch list. That's how they described a church volunteer whose van had stopped 3 nights in a row at a soup kitchen a block from a Target residence. The algorithm didn't know about soup kitchens. It knew about patterns. Somewhere in the loop, a white room hummed with servers translating cell tower pings to arrows, arrows to names, names to door knocks. The operation was designed to be surgical. But algorithms don't understand context, and soldiers don't question target packets at 4 a.m. By 7:12 a.m., fog over the Chicago River turned the skyline into a gray silhouette of smoke and steam. What began as a targeted security operation had expanded into a full-scale lockdown of the city's industrial districts. From the air, Blackhawk silhouettes cut slow circles above rooftops, their rotors pushing fog into spirals. Below, convoys of tan-armored trucks blocked intersections once used for morning deliveries. Local news anchors tried to keep up, reading from teleprompters with voices that trembled on every update. Federal assets assisting in coordinated detentions, one anchor said, carefully avoiding the word military. Cameras panned to half-empty streets where armored vehicles idled beside food marts and gas stations. On one feed, a group of residents waved cardboard signs. Where are our families? At 07:46, a C-17 Globemaster from Fort Campbell, Kentucky touched down at Midway Airport, carrying equipment support teams. Officially, they were logistics units to help manage temporary processing sites. Unofficially, soldiers offloaded portable fencing, biometric scanners, and satellite uplink crates. One of the flight crew whispered to a ground tech, "We're not supposed to be doing this stateside." The tech didn't answer. By mid-morning, social media filled with clips shot from apartment windows, silhouettes moving in formation, radio chatter bleeding through police scanners, families herded into school gymnasiums converted into verification zones. One video showed soldiers eating cold MREs beside basketball hoops, their rifles propped against bleachers. The description read simply, "My city looks like a war zone." At 09:22, Washington finally spoke. The president's press secretary called it Operation Northern Shield, a joint federal initiative to remove violent criminal elements exploiting sanctuary loopholes. Reporters asked why armored Strykers and tactical aircraft were involved. No answer. The feed cut mid-question. On the ground, panic spread faster than clarification. Grocery lines formed. Gas stations ran dry. Anyone without clear proof of residency avoided major roads. And the list of priority zones expanded again, this time including neighborhoods with no previous record of violations. The logic behind the operation was fracturing. Pause and tell us in the comments, do you think the government would ever deploy active duty troops for domestic law enforcement? Or has that line already disappeared without anyone noticing? Subscribe to Navy Warfare if you want analysis that doesn't flinch. By noon, protest crowds swelled. Hundreds of demonstrators marched toward the federal building, chanting names of the missing. A wall of riot shields met them halfway. The first flashbang detonated at 12:07 p.m. The sound echoed through the loop, like thunder trapped between towers. Live streams multiplied, then vanished one by one as networks throttled connections. By 1340 hours, Chicago was no longer a city under control. It was a battlefield of noise, smoke, and confusion. The haze from tear gas mixed with the cold breath of the lake, turning downtown into a gray shroud that swallowed both the protest lines and the armored vehicles trying to hold them back. On Michigan Avenue, hundreds of demonstrators surged forward behind makeshift banners, banging on traffic signs and trash cans like drums. "Let them go!" they shouted, voices cracking, phones raised high even as networks lagged. Soldiers formed two ranks, shields forward, rifles slung tight but loaded. Their commander's voice came through comms, calm and robotic. "Maintain perimeter integrity. No live fire unless engaged." Then a bottle hit a shield, then a rock. The first soldier flinched and the line buckled for a heartbeat. That was enough. The crowd rushed, and chaos exploded. From a rooftop above Grant Park, an MQ-9 Reaper drone banked wide, its camera tracking movement below. Officially, it was there for crowd mapping. Unofficially, analysts inside the mobile command truck were tagging hotspots, clusters of civilians that could, in Pentagon jargon, be classified as hostile groupings. "Crowd density rising beyond safe parameters," said a young analyst. "Define safe," her supervisor replied, staring at the monitor. At 14:05, the National Guard detachment out of Joliet was activated. Convoys rumbled up I-55, Humvees, fuel trucks, medevac vans, and entered the city under the pretext of stabilization. Their arrival split the forces on the ground. Regular Army units answered to the Pentagon. Guard units answered to the governor, and neither was clear who actually had command. That's when the first defection happened. Near Roosevelt Road, a lieutenant from the 101st Airborne refused to advance his platoon after witnessing civilians pinned under a toppled barricade. Body cam footage later leaked showed him yelling, "These are Americans, damn it," before his audio cut out. He was detained 15 minutes later by military police. His men stayed silent, but they didn't move either. By 15:30, fires burned in the South Loop. A car lot went up in flames after a tear gas canister ricocheted through its window. The sky filled with black smoke, visible as far as Oak Park. On the scanners, words like containment, curfew, and asset control began replacing legal terms like arrest. It was the language of war, echoing inside an American city. At 16:10, radio intercepts picked up something new: calls for civilian militias forming on the city's outskirts. Veterans, truckers, and off-duty local police began coordinating through encrypted apps. Their goal: to extract relatives held in processing zones. For the first time, the Army realized it might face armed resistance from its own population. As daylight faded, tracer rounds cut across the skyline, warning shots, officially. But the sound carried far, amplified by glass and steel. The city trembled, stores shuttered, bridges raised, traffic lights blinked red into the dusk. Somewhere in the chaos, a voice on an open military frequency said the words no one wanted to hear. "We've lost radio with Northern Command." By nightfall, Chicago wasn't just locked down. It was severed, digitally, logistically, politically. The operation had turned into something no one could fully control. And across the rest of the country, phones began to vibrate with the same emergency alert. Shelter in place until further notice. By 06 bar the next morning, the smoke had thinned, but the silence was worse. Chicago lay under a pale autumn sun that revealed the damage daylight had hidden. Burned storefronts, empty intersections, armored vehicles abandoned where their engines had stalled in the night. The city looked like a paused film, motionless, waiting for orders that never came. At 07:43 a.m., the president addressed the country from a secure broadcast hub beneath Andrews Air Force Base. His face was drawn, his words exact. Our nation has faced a domestic insurgency of misinformation and violence. Effective immediately, all regional commands are instructed to de-escalate, restore civil order, and return to constitutional oversight. But inside the Pentagon, that order sparked confusion. Some field officers claimed they hadn't received authorization for retreat. Others said they'd already pulled out overnight. In several cities, Guard units began handing control back to local authorities while active duty battalions simply vanished from tracking grids. No comms, no GPS pings, just gone. At 09:15, civilian rescue teams entered Chicago's South Loop processing zone. What they found looked less like a battlefield and more like a data experiment gone wrong. Thousands of wrist tags scattered across the ground, laptops still logging names into empty fields, portable antennas humming without operators. Files later recovered showed that 82% of the detainee records had no charges attached. The algorithm had built its own logic, then collapsed under its own weight. By noon, the first convoys rolled out: medical, humanitarian, cleanup. The soldiers inside looked like ghosts, sleepless, dust gray, carrying weapons that hung heavier than they had yesterday. Some wore armbands of duct tape, a field sign meaning neutral. No one saluted as they passed. Outside the city, along I-55, civilians formed volunteer corridors to guide ambulances and distribute water. Someone hung a banner from an overpass. "We remember the night Chicago stood still." It trended for exactly 8 minutes before national filters erased it. In Washington, a classified memo circulated among intelligence chiefs. Its title, Urban Containment Doctrine Review. The final paragraph admitted what no official briefing had dared to say. Military integration with civilian enforcement exceeded planned parameters. Civil trust degradation. Severe. The author signed only with initials. At 1640, an emergency session of Congress demanded a full investigation. The hearing lasted 19 minutes before the feed cut to color bars. By sunset, curfews were lifted, but the damage to infrastructure, to belief, to identity remained. America had looked at its reflection in the dark glass of control and seen something unrecognizable staring back. Final tally from Operation Northern Shield. Over 8,000 individuals detained in 48 hours, 82% released without charges. 3 soldiers court-martialed for refusal to obey orders. 17 fatalities, 14 civilian, 2 National Guard, 1 active duty. Estimated property damage, $340 million. Congressional inquiries, ongoing. Criminal prosecutions from the operation, 0. The operation that was designed to restore order had instead exposed the fragility of the line between military and police, between security and occupation, between America and something else entirely. Now I want 3 perspectives from you. First, does the deployment of active duty military forces for domestic law enforcement represent a necessary response to modern threats, or does it violate fundamental constitutional principles that protect Americans from military rule? Second, what does Operation Northern Shield reveal about the dangers of algorithm-driven targeting and the collapse of human judgment when technology dictates who gets detained? Third, if you were the commanding officer on the ground in Chicago, at what point would you have refused orders, or would you have followed them to the end? Comment your detailed strategic, legal, and moral analysis below. Your insights drive the conversations we have on Navy warfare. And if this breakdown of the most controversial domestic military operation in modern American history gave you new understanding of how thin the line really is between security and tyranny. Prove it by hitting that like button, subscribing to Navy Warfare, and turning on notifications. Because what happened in Chicago could happen anywhere, and the next time, we might not get to ask questions afterward. Until next time, stay informed, stay critical, and remember, the freedoms you don't defend are the freedoms you'll lose.